Now, if I can, we'd like to proceed to my introduction of John Finnegan. I don't know how much of an introduction John needs either, but John is the past publisher of the Pioneer Press, St. Paul Pioneer Press, a freedom of information advocate for decades in the state of Minnesota, and one of the pioneers of the development of Minnesota's Government Data Practices Act. So John, may I ask you to come to the stage and introduce our award recipient?
I find it getting harder every year to get up on the stage. I don't know exactly why that is. I just want to echo Rick Neumeister's response to you, Chief Justice. I know my late son would be very impressed with your career and certainly with your efforts as the Chief Justice, as am I, in the area of openness in both the court system and generally. You know, most newspaper men and women work hard to maintain freedom of information in our country. The public's right to know what is going on in government is extremely important to them. And that's not just because their jobs depend on gathering information in our society, but really because they know that access to information is vital to keep our democracy functioning properly. That was certainly true in my days as an active journalist, and it is true today. Unfortunately, today there are fewer active newspaper people who can serve as watchdogs of those who govern us. Therefore, it is important that those who do fill that role of overseeing the public interest are recognized and praised for their efforts, which is why I'm so pleased and honored to be part of today's award ceremony. Back in the 1950s, when I began covering the legislation for the Pioneer Press, I didn't really expect to be deeply involved in efforts to open government records and meetings of public bodies to the public. Reporters were not supposed to become active in working for creation of statutes that related to public policy, especially statutes that related to access to information. Most journalists at the time felt that that would be very self-serving and should be avoided. I too initially felt that way, but soon realized that if journalists didn't get involved, no one else would be likely to do so. That's why I joined with Jack McKay, the AP Bureau Chief at the Capitol, to support the first state's open meeting statutes back in the 50s. Later, I worked on amendments designed to strengthen that law and to provide some penalties for violations. And later, along with Don Gemmerling, worked on creation of the current Data Practices Act. I was naive enough to think that journalists' work was done after these initial laws were passed. As you all know, that has not been the case. There must be constant effort to keep that information in meetings with public bodies open. Sometimes all public bodies are seeking efforts to close their meetings. And there must be constant pressure to penalize the frequent violations of the laws, which is one reason that I am pleased that the recipient of this year's John R. Finnegan FOI Award is a community newspaper editor and publisher with whom I have worked for years as co-chair of the Minnesota Newspaper Association Legislative Committee. I know of no journalist in Minnesota today who has done more to educate government officials and the public on freedom of information and First Amendment issues than Reed Anfinson. He's done this work as an official representative of two newspaper groups, the National Newspaper Association and the Minnesota Newspaper Association. He has lobbied on open meeting and records legislation at the Minnesota legislature and before Congress on FOI sunshine laws and the federal shield law. During the 30 years he has been at the Swift County Monitor News as a reporter, managing editor, and publisher, he has on many occasions stood up in front of the public body to tell them that they cannot take the action they are anticipating because it will violate the open meeting law. But if we don't do it, who will, he says. Thank goodness Reed does it. And he is effective because he knows what the laws are, something that not all journalists have learned. Of course, it also helps that Reed has a brother, Mark Anfinson, whose media law background is impeccable. Therefore, it is highly appropriate that Reed Anfinson is the 2010 recipient of the John R. Finnegan Award, and it is a great honor for me to present it to him today. Reed. Appropriate plaque for you.
Thank you. This is a great honor that Minnesotan is bestowing on me. I can't say enough about John Finnegan and my relationship with him. I have learned so much, and I am still a student in his school. What he has done, his dedication, his unerring sense of what the public needs and what it should have, and how to seek the documents and go to the meetings that provide that information, has been invaluable. I think that challenge of gathering information is going to get more difficult in the coming years with the decline of newspapers. Not all newspapers are in decline. Many rural newspapers and small regional dailies are still very strong. However, we look at the Minnesota Newspaper Association that represents newspapers. We spend over $100,000 a year lobbying the Minnesota legislature on issues of freedom of information, on data practices, and the open meeting law. We have two people who look through every single bill and every single amendment that's introduced to comb through those bills to see if they would restrict access to data or provide more provisions for closed meetings. We are the only organization that does that on such a comprehensive level. Now imagine newspapers in decline, and imagine a legislature without the Minnesota Newspaper Association there looking over every single bill. How long would it take before little bits and pieces of laws got changed, restricting access to information? So we have a lot of challenges ahead in that way. The same thing works for the courts. As newspapers are in decline and don't have the finances to fight the court battles, things could start to slip by. In the case of the Watergate stories, the chief financial officer of the Washington Post came to Catherine Boehm and said, "We are down $7 million since you started running these stories." Her reply was, "It's a good thing we can afford it." Who would say that today? And so we have a lot of challenges ahead of us to keep information free, open to the public, and people like you do a great job in helping us in that process. And again, thanks to John.